Hey folks, this is Alan Jones with HiFi Buys in Atlanta.
And this is David White with HiFi Buys in Atlanta.
We're going to do a discussion today, and we're going to talk a lot about cartridges. And I am fortunate enough to have David White with us, which in my opinion is the leading analog guy in the Atlanta, or really pretty much in the Southeast. So if you ever have anything that you need as far as analog, would it be turntable setups, want to discuss and talk about some of the things that we did, or to come down and purchase a table, as many have from David or myself, we would love to have you down. One of the things that we want to do is help you understand about phono cartridges and kind of how they work so that you have a better idea and understanding as to what you're doing. And then we also have a very special surprise about optical cartridges with DS Audio here towards the end as well. So David, if you don't mind, help us all understand a little bit about how a moving magnet cartridge works.
Okay. A moving magnet cartridge is probably the most common cartridge people come across. It's on some of your budget tables, and they have a price point. I think one of the most expensive moving magnet cartridges I've known of is about $2,500, but they can start as low as, $20. They use magnets on the end of the cantilever that are moved by the groove movement to wave themselves in front of coils. So the coils in a moving magnet cartridge are fixed in the cartridge body, and the magnets are on the end of the cantilever, and they get moved around by the groove movement. And when we have magnets and coils interacting with each other, we generate a tiny amount of electricity. In the case of a moving magnet cartridge, that amount of electricity is usually around 5 millivolts, or 5 thousandths of a volt. So it's a really small amount of electricity.
So one of the things, and you were talking about like the cantilever, just for folks that don't know, the cantilever is the little part that sticks out and holds the needle. I think David's right in the sense that we see most of these on more of our more economical tables. I would say down here with tables from anywhere from about the $350 to right up to about the $700 or $800 area. And even beyond that a little bit, we'll do moving magnet cartridges on. And then we're gonna get up to some of the better tables that we end up doing as well that allow a lot more performance, and therefore we need a cartridge that does a better job on those tables and arms as well. So that would be going to a moving coil cartridge. And if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about how that works.
Yeah, correct. A moving coil cartridge was invented essentially to make a lighter weight mechanism appear on the end of the cantilever. So when the groove's trying to move this cantilever, when it had magnets on the end of it, it had a lot of mass and a lot of inertia, and it was harder for it to move back and forth. So people came up with, why don't we take the fixed coils that were inside the cartridge body, miniaturize them to a tiny little armature about that size, and put it on the end of the cantilever, and it would be lighter than the magnets that they were using. So now in a moving coil, we have moving coils. The coils are moving from the cantilever movement, and the magnets are fixed inside the cartridge body. They achieved getting a lighter weight mechanism, which made the cantilever more nimble in following the groove movement.
And what does that do for?
It frees up the movement to be able to track the more intricate parts of the treble frequencies. It also gives you better dynamic range because you can swing back and forth more sharply. So it improves overall in terms of more detail retrieval and also a dynamic range improvement.
So a real sonic difference.
But it comes at a cost. They made this sacrifice of making the generator mechanism lighter by going from magnets to coils. But what they lost by doing that was output voltage. So a moving coil cartridge has significantly less output voltage, usually 10 times less. So I mean like a 0.5 instead of 5 millivolts.
Wow.
And that makes you have to have a better phono preamp. I typically don't recommend people to buy a moving coil cartridge and run it through a fairly inexpensive phono preamp because the signal has to be multiplied so many times.
And because of all that multiplication, we need a quality amplifier that's doing that. Otherwise, we kind of fall on our face just trying to do moving coil with a bunch of gain.
Absolutely. You'll end up introducing noise because you're taking the input signal and you're multiplying it so many times before it becomes the output signal. In the case of like a very low output moving coil, which some people really strive for because the generator mechanism is so much lighter, it'll have 0.1 millivolts of output. And when we run that through a calculator that shows you how much gain you're adding to that, as well as how many times you're multiplying the input signal to get the output signal, it's pretty alarming. I mean, you're adding 70 decibels of gain, and you're multiplying the input signal to the output signal, at least in the bass region where you have to multiply it the most, by about 44,000 times. And
Wow.
that is a wow moment, because think of a phono preamp that has to be quiet enough to take a signal and be able to multiply it 44,000 times and not be noisy about doing it.
One thing we have learned is that, basically any super high gain does have noise in it, and it's nearly impossible to not have that noise in it. And so one of the things that we've looked at in trying to find the best solutions for vinyl for not only ourselves, because we listen to vinyl at home, but also our customers, is we have found a company called DS Audio, and they're doing something that's quite different. You want to tell us a little bit about what they're doing, and we'll kind of carry through some of the advantages that they offer.
So in an effort to really produce what would be the ideal cartridge, you would want the lightest weight generator mechanism, like when they moved from moving magnets to moving coils, they were trying to achieve that.
Okay.
But you'd also like to not make the trade-off they made, which is where you went from higher output to lower output. You'd like to have a super lightweight mechanism that's being thrown around by the cantilever and the groove movement, but also have high output. DS
Then we
Audio,
don't need the gain,
so
so
you
we
don't
keep the
need
noise
to do
there.
that, that 44,000 multiplication of gain in the bass region. So you'd like to have a high output cartridge that has a very lightweight generator mechanism. We can't make high output cartridges out of magnets and coils. They would be so heavy that the tone arm wouldn't be able to support them, and there'd be too much pressure in the stylus pressure and running through your groove.
It'd be like Franken table.
Yeah, it would be something pretty scary. So these guys have pulled it off, and the way they did it is they changed the way that they generate electricity inside the cartridge. Instead of using magnets and coils, they're using LEDs and photodetectors. And everybody may be going like, oh, that sounds like digital. Well, no, this was all invented before digital ever existed. They just didn't have the right technology of LEDs and photodetectors back then to make it as beautiful sounding as it is now.
So because of the advances in technology in LEDs and any of the optical things that we use in this, there's also a gentleman that's in charge of this company, and his family kind of has a lot of, I should say, hierarchy over time with lights and that type of thing. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I believe the gentleman that founded the company's father was involved with the patent on the optical mouse with Microsoft.
Amazing.
Yeah, so it was the son's curiosity to go find out what this technology was about and see what they could do to improve it, what the current technology we have today. It's turned out to be what we consider one of the ideal cartridges, because it has a beryllium shade instead of a set of magnets in a moving magnet cartridge, or it's a tiny little armature coil in a moving coil cartridge. The thing's been replaced by this tiny little beryllium shade, and it weighs about 10% of what the smallest moving coil armature weight. So we gained a 90% weight reduction in the thing that's being moved around by the cantilever movement from the groove. So that's one of the ideals you'd want in a cartridge, and they've achieved that. And then the output level of these cartridges is 70 millivolts, and that's
amazing.
Mind-boggling.
It is.
I mean, considering some of your highest output moving magnets are maybe 7 millivolts, this is 10 times that.
Right.
So when we run that through a phono preamp, we find out that instead of adding 70 decibels of gain, we're adding about 13 decibels of gain.
Wow.
And that's like what a preamp does.
So this 44,000 times thing that we do with the moving coil
that ends up being 63 times. So instead of 44,000 times, we're only multiplying the input to the output in the bass region 63 times.
I know that one time we had discussed, and this was when I was gaining my education about this as well, we had talked about moving coils and how when they slide and kind of the type of motor that they are and what that does in the bass region and why that has to be made up. This is not really necessary with the newer DS Audio style of cartridge.
Yeah, what you're referring to there, Alan, is traditional cartridges that use magnets and coils. Essentially, they are what we call a velocity proportional generator, and that sounds like a really high-tech term.
It is. We like those here.
But what it means is the faster the coils move in the magnetic field, the more electricity or voltage they generate. And the slower they move in the magnetic field, the less voltage they generate. Well, that's really a problem for the way records are recorded, because records are recorded with something called the RIAA curve, the Record Industry Association of America curve, and it already starts with your bass being lower in amplitude than what it will be on playback, and your treble is higher in amplitude than what it will be on playback. So we now take that problem that we have on the record and we make it worse by the the generator we're using. Because bass on the record is slow movements and it generates less voltage. So we've got a bass level that's already low and we're generating it into the phono preamp and reducing its volume even more.
Simply because of the way that it...
Because of the way the magnets and the coils interact with each other. And treble is the fast moving parts of the groove. And so now the generator moves quickly. And when we've said this is velocity proportional, so the faster it moves, the more voltage it generates, and now we've made treble worse than it was on the record. So this makes the phono preamp do some very heavy lifting to bring the bass up from even further than it was before, and to bring the treble down, to equalize it.
And to provide all the gain.
And then to provide the gain. And sometimes it's like up to 70 dB in the case of the moving coil cartridges. The DS Audio cartridge is an amplitude proportional generator. And that means the wider it moves, the more voltage it generates. And the tighter it moves, the less voltage it generates.
So that's the ideal situation.
When you think about it, yes, because treble is now tight movement and we're going to generate less voltage, and bass is wider movement and we're going to generate more voltage. So it starts to correct what the problem was with the RIAA curve on the record before it feeds it to the phono preamp.
Wow.
The phono preamp doesn't have to do nearly as much equalization. It doesn't have to bring that bass way up and doesn't have to bring the treble down to get a flat response coming out of it.
So one thing we've learned kind of in all of our years of stereo, certainly our years together as well, is that noise is the biggest detractor of being able to hear everything within the song you're trying to play. So we have spent an enormous amount of time here through things like AudioQuest with their Niagara systems and power cords and interconnects and that kind of thing. Manufacturers are doing all kinds of upgrades to reduce noise within their gear and those kind of things as well. HRS racks are here to be able to do that as well. Then we talk about room treatments, which also can lower a noise floor as well. And so when you look at all those things, what I know is that we have lots of resolution in our systems, and what we're needing to do is reduce the noise so that we can actually hear what's on our records or on our CDs or on our digital files or these types of things. And this seems to be truly an ideal, almost a no-brainer. So can you tell me some of the experiences that you've had with customers with it that have gone from, shall we say, a particular cartridge, and we don't necessarily need to get into names or things, but kind of what they did with DS Audio and how it worked for them?
Yeah, we've had some customers that literally have replaced systems that cost twice as much between the cartridge and the phono preamp, and been happier than they were with the system that cost twice as much.
That's quite a statement.
And there's a lot of other little advantages. Like with moving coil, there's this process you go through of setting the input impedance of the phono preamp. And it's anywhere usually from maybe 50 ohms to 1,000 ohms is where you play around with those load settings. With these cartridges, you don't have that anymore. It's not it's not a part of the equation anymore. And so that takes that away, and you wonder as you're listening to all those different load settings, which one sounded the best,
right.
And you're going, they all sounded the same to me. I don't have to worry about that anymore because it's going to sound the best it's going to sound without worrying about load settings.
Yeah.
The one thing they do let you do on their phono preamps, and as you go up in them at a higher cost, they give you more options for this, but they usually give you at least 2 settings for how you're going to roll a subsonic filter in.
Okay.
And as you go up into the more expensive products, they give you 4 settings and then they give you 6.
Okay.
And it's a combination of a switch on the back and then which output. They actually have more physical outputs on the back.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the top unit has 3 sets of outputs and a switch, and that gives you 6 different settings.
Wow. Okay.
So you're getting to set where the bass rolls off and then what curve you want in terms of like, do you want a steep slope or do you want a gradual slope?
Gradual load off.
Yeah. So it gives you 6 combinations. But even in the basic E1 entry-level system, they give you 2 slopes of 30 and 50. And I tell you, a lot of people don't play around with subsonic filters, but I always recommend them, and these guys have implemented them really well. And also, you're going to hear more bass than you've ever heard before out of your cartridge, so you may actually decide you want to try one out. Because you're going to hear bass like you've never heard before. These things are incredible dynamic performers. When Alan was talking about lowering the noise floor, when you lower the noise floor, you hear so much more detail that was obscured by that noise floor because it was hidden by it.
So let's talk a little bit about like groove wall noise.
Yeah.
I know that comes up a lot in these, and it's something that I know I have experienced personally with them and really don't get as much of that because we're not providing all the gain.
Yeah. So there's something that goes on when a diamond, in whatever exotic shape it is, touches the sides of the V-shaped groove wall, and that's a constant source of friction, but it's also a low-level noise in the background of recordings we listen to. And you can kind of hear it even more in the dead wax areas of records. That groove wall noise that gets multiplied 44,000 times when you're using a moving coil cartridge that's low output versus just 63 times when you're using one of these DS audio cartridges, it makes it pretty much go away. And I've heard people say it feels like they're listening to a master tape. Because you're basically hearing no physical vibration of the groove wall against the diamond. And it just makes you hear detailed passages just jump out at you, and dynamics just startle you. The way it comes out of a dark background that we always love to hear people talk about.
Absolutely. And manufacturers spend a ton of money to get that black background. And we finally have an opportunity now in analog to have that black background because we really had a hard time getting there before. There was always so much associated noise and gain and those kind of things that we've discussed. I think one of the things that I guess has taken me by surprise is how many folks at the upper level and all the way down through the line, every single person in every step within these DS audio cartridges, we've seen an amazing amount of love towards them. One of the things you'll notice behind us, we have a DS audio and a Brinkmann, and one of the things I've always liked is a light on the end of my cartridge, even though I never could have one and never knew I wanted one, but now I know I want one and I love it because it's so much easier to align. It tells me exactly where things should go. It just makes things a lot easier for me. So if you don't mind, take us a little bit through the line and let's start off at the entry level and kind of work our way up the line.
Yes, so they have 6 cartridges now and they have 5 phono preamp energizer equalizers, whatever you want to call them.
Okay.
If you buy them in a matching set, they match colors like this, but you don't have to do that. You can mix and match and have a different color on your cartridge as a different color on your phono preamp. But they start with an E1 system that is a cartridge that used to retail for $12.50, and the phono preamp that matches it is the E1 phono preamp equalizer, and it is $1,500. So that made them $2,750, but they are essentially closing that model out, and they're selling them for $2,000, and I don't think they have very many left. I almost hate to talk about it. But while supplies last, they'll have that. The next combination up is a cartridge that costs $2,500, and the phono preamp is $3,500. So together there's $6,000. All of these cartridges that I'm going to talk about from here on up are 3rd generation cartridges by DS Audio. The entry level one is a 1st generation, and that's why it's going to be replaced. But from there on up, they're 3rd generation cartridges. So these guys have been doing this, I think, for about 10 years now.
I think a little bit beyond that, but yeah.
And they're on their 3rd generation. So they've learned a lot and they've improved them a lot. So the DS003 is the one that's $6,000, and the 003 means it's a 3rd generation. They then go to the W3, and the W3 is a $5,000 cartridge and a $10,000 phono preamp. It's the first phono preamp that has balanced outputs.
Okay.
And that's been really our most popular seller. It's a $15,000 combination. Goes really nice on a Brinkmann Bardot that's about $15,000
we've seen that.
roughly. And that's the way we have it set up here in the store. From there we go to this one behind us, and this is the Master 3 combination. So the Master 3 cartridge is $9,500, and the Master 3 phono preamp is $17,500 for a combination of $27,000. We just sold one of those to a happy customer. It's going to be getting one here shortly. From there we go to the rig we have in the other room on our largest system, and that is the Grandmaster cartridge and the Grandmaster phono preamp. The Grandmaster cartridge is $15,000, and the Grandmaster phono preamp, which is 2 boxes about this size, is $45,000. They make one more cartridge that they just came out with since the Grandmaster was introduced, and that's the Grandmaster EX. It's $22,500. They didn't create another phono preamp to match it with it. You can match it with the Grandmaster phono preamp that's $45,000. That one, before you speak, is actually a 2-box unit.
Yes.
And it weighs about 100 pounds. So I mean, just imagine a phono preamp that weighs 100 pounds and is in 2 boxes.
And is not doing the 44,000 times of gain.
Yeah.
It's doing how many?
63 times a multiplication of base signals and 13 dB of gain. Yeah.
Yep.
So it's really not having to work as hard as a typical phono preamp would. And the amazing thing is that they put a huge amount of capacitor storage in these things.
I was just getting ready to touch on that. I think one of the things that I was amazed at is we talk about not needing much gain, so therefore I was thinking, well, you know, when we get the phono stages, they're probably not going to be engineered to the same kind of level and that kind of stuff if we're seeing the stuff that needs all this gain, but it's actually been the exact opposite of that, hasn't it?
Yeah, yeah. The largest one that's in 2 boxes has a mind-boggling amount of capacitor storage in it. One box has 2.9 farads and the other box has 2.3 farads, and that is farads, I said. So that's like 5.2 farads, which is like 5,200,000 microfarads in a phono preamp. I never could have dreamed anyone was going to do something like that, but it makes it effortless in terms of how the music flows out of it.
And it sounds that way.
Yeah.
It really does. I have been so impressed with this company, and I think one of the things that, you know, you and I have talked a little bit about, you know, companies are doing a lot of upgrades and those kind of things, but we don't see a lot of what I'd call true game changers in this industry. And I think this absolutely qualifies as one. I can tell you for the last 10 or 15 years, I don't think I've had a single, you know, product that probably came out and just, well, maybe Audio Quest Niagara when that did. I think that was another one of those that was a real game changer, but I'd kind of just blow right on by it because, you know, this is really weird. I want to do it the old way. I'm an old school guy. Well, in reality, it's still old school. We're just using newer technology to do a much better design of the cartridge and the phono stage all the way through.
Yeah, and to calm your fears about this being traditional technology, they have needles, they have diamonds.
Yep.
As you go up in the price, the cantilever becomes more expensive to the point where it becomes a diamond cantilever, and the diamond shapes become more exotic. In fact, at the $22,500 level, for the Grandmaster EX cartridge, they have a cantilever and diamond stylus that are lab grown as one piece. It's amazing to see that under a microscope, because now you don't have to worry about whether the new diamond was mounted into the cantilever perfectly aligned, because this has been lab grown to be perfectly aligned. So it's a pretty cool technology, and we've heard that and been super impressed with it.
I know I actually took my girlfriend Melanie's album out to Expona and got to hear her album on 2 systems that had DS Audio's Top Gear on it. And that was really my first experience with the very top level cartridge. But I will tell you, just so impressed with the realism, the dynamics, the lower noise floor, which allows all that to come out. It's just, it really is an incredible thing. So I would tell anyone, and I do mean this, anyone that is looking at a decent table and an arm combination and is looking at doing, or has a good table and arm and is looking at doing an upgrade for it, I would strongly recommend that you look at it as opposed to looking, even though it looks like cartridge and phono stage, and you think, my gosh, but like David explained earlier, a lot of times we have people spending half of what they spent before and getting a huge upgrade in the process. So I think you'll find that there's really something here for you, and all we'd like you to do is to come down and have the experience. And the folks that have spent a lot of time with Dave, most all of them are owners of that.
Yep, it's pretty convincing once you hear it.
It is. It's not slick. It's actually engineering prowess. I mean, I don't know any other way to say it.
Yeah. I mean, I worked in the computer industry for 30-some years, and we used to overuse a term that I hated to say I would ever use again, and it was called a paradigm shift. And this is a paradigm shift, so you need to come down and experience it for yourself.
I totally agree. David, I want to thank you very much for joining us and being able to help educate folks on these things. I know that your knowledge is very vast, and it's one of the reasons I like having you share these things with it and love having you heading up our analog department at the store. So anytime y'all would like to come down and take a listen or make a call, please just find out. We did this as an educational video so that you'll be able to tell the difference between what a moving magnet and a moving coil, and then also what DS Audio is doing today with optical cartridges. They are the best of the best. They are a game changer, or as David put it,
paradigm shift.
We want to thank y'all very much. Again, this is Alan Jones and David White from HiFi Buys in Atlanta.
Thank you.